Hello and happy gaming, everybody. My name is Dark Sage Walker. My birds just wanted to say hello there. Just there they are. You can't see them, but there they are. Hey Riku. Hey Cecil. I know you just wanted to get your 2 cents in before I start talking. Anyway, as you've probably already figured out from the title of the video, this is going to be my One Step from Eden Anima spells ranked tier list. Pardon me. The Sierra Mist also wanted to say hello. So this is just kind of my off-the-cuff thoughts on every Anima spell in One Step from Eden. As always, remember with any tier list, this is just kind of my silly little personal opinion. So take it however you want to. Obviously, big shout out to tiermaker.com. Although I do have issue with the idea that they made me sign up for Twitter to do this. I would like to have just signed up for the website by itself, but oh well. I'm not going to be too upset about it. There's still plenty of things there's still plenty of other things in the world that are more important than, oh, they made me sign up for Twitter, you jerks. Meh. So, some criteria for the list. Rule number 1: every spell that I list, every spell that I rate, I'm going to be rating as though it were in a vacuum. So this is just how the spells function by themselves. No combos, no synergies, just as they are on their own. There are some spells in which that's going to be very difficult to make a rating for because some of these spells simply don't stand on their own. When that comes up, I will acknowledge it and offer an opinion on the matter. Rule number 2, remember, this is just my own personal opinion. That, of course, does mean that it is factually correct, but if you want to disagree with me, please do so civilly, and we will have a nice little discussion about it. And third of all, remember, we're just here to have fun. The One Step from Eden is a game that you can play any way you want. There are some ways that I think are more optimal than others, but ultimately, you play the game how you want to. If whatever you're doing is working for you, more power to you, but hopefully by my sharing my opinions, I am able to shed some light on the subject. Also, I am going to be doing tier lists like this for each brand of spell, which means I will be going over each spell within that brand. So this is going to be a bit of a project, but this is the most logical starting point. Why? Because Anima is the first one. It starts with A. Big surprise. So, let's start with the very logical choice. We're going to start with Frostbolt. The reason why I'm starting with Frostbolt is because I think that's the perfect candidate for middle of the road. It's quick, it does decent damage. I mean, it does 40, so it's not amazing damage, but it's not bad damage either. It costs 1 mana, it applies 1 frost. Like, this is, I'm pretty sure, the template that they wanted to go for when designing not just the Anima spells, but spells in general. So, that's why I'm putting it very middle of the road. It's very usable by itself. It doesn't do anything above average, aside from it applies more frost than spells that don't apply frost. Let me take a quick sip here. Oh, Sierra Mist, you make my world go round. Now, the next spell that's the closest to that would be PK Fire, and I'm certain that is obviously something taken from, playing Nest too much in Wi-Fi battles. Now I'm going to put that at A, and to me, it's almost S. Now why is that? Well, again, we're rating it in a vacuum, so it only costs 1 mana, it does less damage than Frostbolt, which is a point against it, but that's only contact damage, because it leaves a fire behind that creates a nice little trap for your enemies. If you're fighting an enemy that doesn't move very much, like Terra or Terrible when they're casting a spell, or the Gate of Eden, because it just likes to sit there, that's continuous damage for the next about 5 seconds or so. That fire will just sit there and burn up and burn up and burn up, and oh, it's so good! It's so good! And And as I said, that's just how it functions by itself. When you start adding in synergies that work with flames, like the Citrine, it just gets so good. But as it is, and just by itself, definitely nice. Now, with those two out of the way, let's start going in order, starting with Backburner. I'm putting that at C rank. It creates a nice global effect across the board. It's probably one of the few things that you can use to effectively get the Watch the World Burn achievement. Outside of that, though, it's just too self-destructive to really work well. Like, I have plenty of issues with spells that do damage to you as well. Some of them I can overlook it, some of them it's not a big deal. With this one, it's just essentially you're cordoning off a section of your own field, and I'm sorry, that just doesn't do it for me. It feels bad. So I'm putting it down here. It still has uses, and it can be good with certain fire synergies, but by itself, that's where I feel it belongs. Blizzard. Now, this one is a big, wide-ranging area of effect. It just rains bolts on the enemy side of the field that don't do a ton of damage by themselves, but do build up frost. Now, with all of that having been said, it's like, Dark Sage, that's a wide area of effect that affects the entire enemy field. Why are you only putting it at B? 2 reasons. Well, 3 actually. 1, the bolts don't do a lot of damage by themselves, but that's not a huge problem. 2, the shots themselves rain down kind of slowly, so it's not. So when you're up against the computer, again, I'm not necessarily ranking how these spells work in PvP. You guys can figure that out on your own. But the shots rain down randomly and rain down slowly. So it lasts a little while, which isn't a bad thing, but it's also kind of hard to say that it's having a lot of effect when the shots come down so slowly. Now, again, this works great on the Gate of Eden because it takes up an entire half of the enemy field. But against other opponents, especially ones that like to move around a lot, is iffy. And problem number 3, it costs 5 mana, so you have to really build yourself up to even be able to cast the spell. And then when you do, it's iffy at best. Do I think that it works well by itself? It can. It's one of those things that you can just fire and forget. One of the reasons why I put it at B and not C or, fail rank. But do I think that it's worth the investment? Only if you're doing a frost-focused build. Otherwise, you might want to steer clear of that one. Brushfire. Well, according to the rules, I have to put it down here. Why? This spell does not work in a vacuum. It absolutely does not. It needs other flames to be able to work, and then what it does is it spreads those frames vertically, and that's not just up, it spreads them 1 tile up and 1 tile down, and refreshes them. So this is, again, a nice way to get that Watch the World Burn achievement. Basically, you would need either Backburner or Carpet Bomb, Combust, and then Brushfire. And I'll probably end up doing that on my own at some point here, but just as of right now, this is kind of what you're looking at when you're looking at the spell. By itself, it absolutely does not work. Now, when coupled with other fire spells, is it worth the investment? So, I would say that Brushfire is mildly worth the investment. I think if you're going for a flame-based build, you're probably better off with Combust. But anything that refreshes flames is good. I would say situationally, this is a low B, maybe a C. And again, this is one of those spells that I'm certainly open to criticism on. Again, remember, this is based strictly on how the spells work in a vacuum. If I were to rate it differently, I'd probably put it at either B or C, but by itself, sorry, it doesn't stand alone. Carpet Bomb. I will not deny that this spell looks cool as fuck. Just raining flames across an entire 3/4 of the battlefield. It's fantastic looking. Now, here's my problem. It only has a 33% chance of leaving a flame on any tile that it hits, and it hits all the way across your tiles and can damage yourself, and it leaves you with Fragile. Now, any one of those things could be overlooked by themselves, but only having a small chance to leave flames and being able to hurt yourself and making you fragile, I don't know. That one's iffy. I'm going to put it at C for now with the proviso that I may go back and change my mind on it later. But by itself, and yeah, it works by itself, but it's a little too self-destructive. Cold Medicine. Ooh, boy, Cold Medicine! You know where this is going. My god, Cold Medicine. So, the one downside to Cold Medicine is that when it hits, you heal the target for 40 damage. That having been said, it applies to Frost, and whenever the enemy hits 3 Frost stacks, now in the original build of the game, once they hit 3 Frost stacks, that was 100 damage. So that means that if you had to use Cold Medicine twice, that was a net gain of 20 damage. But since they buffed Frost, those 3 Frost stacks are now worth 150 damage. Which means if Cold Medicine is your only Frost source, that means that you're hitting for a net positive of 70 damage, and that's off of 0 mana. Absolutely 0 mana, and you get a nice, fast, free shot. No, there's no way that couldn't be S grade. I love that spell. It's a staple of ice-based builds, and you better believe that it belongs at that top grade. Cold Snap, once again, we're putting it up here. It's fast, it's cheap, and all it does is apply 1 Frost, but like I said, that's 1 Frost that, 1, you don't have to work for, and 2, builds towards that 150 damage breaking point. It's a wonderful spell, it's good for... It's one of those things you can add to any build. Now, I'm going to revise my ranking. By itself, I'd probably put it down here. So let me not be too biased. I love Frost builds, and Cold Snap is a good part of them. By itself, I'd probably put it at an A. It's one of those things that you can use to build up. It's one of those things that you can enhance, maybe so it applies Flame or Poison on hit. By itself, just looking at it in a vacuum, that's probably where it belongs. But make no mistake, in an ice-based build, it belongs right up here with Cold Medicine. Combust. Once again, by the rules of the tier list, if you're not doing a fire-based build, you absolutely should not take this spell. Matter of fact, if you're up against enemies that throw flames, this one might even be detrimental. Same with Brush Fire. Now, in a fire-based build, I would rank Combust at high B or A, because what you're doing is you're reigniting the flame tiles that you've set. They're doing 150 damage per flame burst, and it's refreshing those flames. So in a flame-based build, especially if you're using Terra's Pyromancer build, Combust is a staple. It's an absolute must for fire-based builds. In every other build, hard pass. So once again, that's one of those things that, because of the rules of the tier list, I gotta put it down at rank D. But keep in mind, that doesn't mean it's an awful spell, that just means it only works in a vacuum, and I'm not rating things in a vacuum, I'm rating them by themselves. Let me get another sip here. Ah, delicious. Cryo Kinesis. My only issue with this spell is that it doesn't do all of its damage directly. It's also got a charge time that makes it just a little slow to just throw out. But it does 100 damage by itself, and I forget if it lays 1 Frost or 2. If it's 2, then I would put it at A, but because I'm going to put it at A anyway, just assuming that it lays 2 Frost. The only big issue with this spell is that it's got a bit of a charge time. Beyond that, it's actually not a bad spell. Really good in Frost builds, and in a vacuum, still pretty reliable. Ember. I mean, again, it works by itself, but it doesn't do much by itself. And so long as I'm talking about it, I'm going to do Frostbite at the same time. Both of these spells have the same problem. They don't do any direct damage, and they only hit a specific tile. If you're dealing with a slow opponent, that can actually work out in your favor. but by itself, just creating one little flame tile, there's better ways to do it. It's cheap. That's about the best thing it's got going for it. And let me real quick reevaluate Frostbite. I'm going to move it up to B. By itself, it's not any better than Ember, but if you hit the enemy with it 3 times, that's 150 damage. Now, Ember could technically get more than that if the enemy just keeps moving into the fire, but this is another one where, again, it's tricky to rate because it does all of that damage immediately if you have Fragile on, which makes this an okay spell to use for Violet, but not much better than okay. Matter of fact, I am going to move it back down to C. Sorry, that spell just... I don't know. Explosion. This is a Calamity rated spell. This spell does 500 damage to the entire enemy field. They don't get to dodge. They don't get to say anything. They don't get to appeal to a higher court. It's just, you cast the spell, 500 damage. Here's the problem. That costs 5 mana, it has a 5-second wind-up time where you're anchored, and then a 4-second cooldown time afterwards where you have to recover from the spell, and it consumes. No matter, like, looking at it in a vacuum, it doesn't really matter. In a vacuum, in a combo, like, the only way this spell could possibly be good is if it were without one of those two cooldown. If it was either A, without the charge up, B, without the cooldown, or C, it didn't consume, or D, any combination of the above. By itself, this is one of those spells that I think more often than not will just get you killed. 500 damage is huge, but it's not enough to be held completely still and at the enemy's whim for 9 whole seconds. In a game like this, that's way too long. Way, way, way too long. So Explosion gets to be it gets to be the first legitimate D rank. There's reasons to use Brush Fire. There's reasons to use Combust. I can't see one to use Explosion. So, sorry Explosion, you're just garbage. Oh, how do we pronounce this? Fimbulvetter? Filbum? Monkey Crunch? Something? I don't know. This is another pretty obvious S rank. Now, the only big problems with it are that it costs 4 mana and that it consumes. But for what you get for it, it's pretty amazing. It lays 1 frost stack per second for a total of 6 seconds. Now, if you have other frost sources to add on to that, it's absolutely broken. By itself, it's still really good. It's essentially 4 mana for 300 damage that the enemy absolutely cannot dodge. It hits them no matter what. It's the ultimate fire and forget it spell. It's super good. I love this spell. The only problem is that it's a Calamity rated spell, which means you'll very rarely see it. But if you're playing as Celisy and you get the chance to take that spell, you do it. Let's say you're playing as Riva and you're having a hard time finding good direct damage. You see that spell, you take that spell. You will not regret taking Filibuster. I don't know the name of the spell, I'm sorry. Firestorm. Ooh, I love Firestorm. I'm only putting it at an A rank because it does take 4 mana to cast, which means that by the time you get to it, by the time it shows up, you might not be able to cast it. But when you do, it just rains shots strictly on the enemy side that leave flames. This is huge against any enemy. Against enemies that move around a lot, like Terra. She's going to be burning herself up every time she shifts her spot. Against the Gate, this is just guaranteed huge amounts of damage. Against enemies that don't move very much, guess what? They're sitting in the fire taking damage. This spell is absolutely amazing, only hindered by the idea that it costs 4 mana to cast and that these shots are random. If the shots weren't necessarily random but came down in some kind of pattern, maybe it would be S grade, but as is, Firestorm still is a really good spell. And you know what? Let's just talk about Firewall at the same time. This is the sort of spell that does have a pattern, and it does leave the flames. It only costs 2 mana, it's common. You know what? Fuck it. We're putting Firewall up at S grade. It belongs there. Firewall is awesome. In fire builds, it's amazing, absolutely broken. But since we are rating things as they stand by themselves, it still belongs up there. Firewall is great. I have no complaints. Flam Bears. God, this is another one of those spells that looks so cool, and then you use it and it's like, that's all it did? I don't get it. So let me explain. And I'm gonna put Flam Bears down here. This is a rare spell that launches a fireball, hits a target, and then explodes in a cone of fire behind the target. Anything that gets hit by the spread of flame behind the thing that you hit takes 100 damage, and the tiles keep burning. Here's the problem. The target that you hit directly only takes 10 damage. So my thought is, when they designed this spell, they were thinking, oh, maybe you should use it when you're playing as Hazel. She'll drop a wall or a blast crystal or something like that, and then hit it with Flam Bears. It damages the thing that she's trying to break in the first place, and creates a big, huge cone of fire to do more damage. In that specific scenario, Flam Bears is great. Otherwise, I'd say it's almost a hard pass. Really only worth taking if you haven't found any other decent damage sources. And even then, I'd say the mana cost does not justify it. More often than not, Flam Bears is a hard skip no matter how cool it looks. Frost Barrage. Ooh, Frost Barrage. I love this spell. Frost Barrage is a wonderful AoE blast of ice. It hits at the... It fires 3 frost bolts, 1 at the level that you're standing at, 1 above, and 1 below. So it's a wonderful area of effect to try to hit enemies with frost with. It's really good for hitting fast-moving bosses that like to dodge your stuff. It's good for just piling on damage. And here's something that you might not know about Frost Barrage. If you use it at the very top or very bottom of your grid, it condenses the center one and the either topmost or bottommost one respectively into one row. So that's 80 damage, 2 frost, and who knows what else just off of one spell, if your target is at the top or bottom. And even if they're not, this is still a great area of effect. It only costs 2 mana, it's relatively common, it's effective. There's really no reason not to take that spell. Hailstorm. I put Hailstorm above Blizzard. It's almost the exact same thing, except for it costs 1 mana less, and the shots rain down faster. To me, that's enough. It's still not one of those things that I think is absolutely, like, you can't go without it if you're not doing a frost build, but it's still area of effect damage. Against the gate, it's indispensable. I say it belongs at the A rank. Well, I would say low A, maybe on B, but it's not bad. Ice Hockey. We're going to put that at B rank. Ice Hockey is a spell that's really interesting. It's essentially just one diagonal beam that bounces around the field really quickly. It does, I believe, 40 damage and applies 1 frost whenever it hits. So if you're good with diagonal attacks, that's the one that you want to use. It's good in frost builds. In a vacuum, it's iffy. For 3 mana, it's kind of hard to justify an attack that's a little difficult to aim, and could also potentially kill survivors. That's something that you really need to keep in mind when using spells like this. Is on the way to the bosses, it could be detrimental to keeping survivors alive, which, if you're going for neutral or genocide route, is a must in order to keep your health high. So, by itself, it's average. Nothing more, nothing less, just average. I mean, it's starting to make Frostbolt look like it belongs in A rank, but I'm going to leave Frostbolt where it is. Ice Needle. Honestly, I think that belongs in A rank. And looking at it outside of an ice build, it's a piercing needle shot so it can hit more than one enemy. It returns so it can hit more than one enemy twice, which means it's also leaving 2 frost. And of course, on that third Frost stack, it does way more. Frost Needle by itself is a fine spell. I would say it's above fine, seeing as it's an A rank and not B. It's completely effective. I have no problem with Ice Needle. And the flavor text really makes me want to go back and play Hollow Knight again. Ice Spikes. The flavor text on this spell makes me never want to watch Frozen again. Beyond that, the problem that I have with this spell is that it's a little slow and unwieldy. Now, it does fine damage, and the hitbox on Ice Spikes lasts until the spikes actually go away. So you have a good few frames to trap an enemy in it, but the thing is, each spike after you fire it shows up on the enemy tile on the next tile that you're technically standing in front of. So you move it up or down based upon how you move up or down. And the problem with that is that if you need to dodge a wide-ranging attack, there's basically no way to aim that spell. I'm still putting it at B rank because it does have the idea that it only costs 2 mana going for it, and that the spikes last a little while, and they do decent damage when they do hit. But it's not one of those spells you can just throw out and expect to get work done. You have to actually actively think about where you're aiming it, and that creates issues. So, against a hectic boss, Ice Spikes isn't going to get the job done. But there is still time. You can fire the attack in between patterns. You can fire it in when things are less hectic. It is what it is. Mini Thunder. I'm torn on Mini Thunder. I usually don't take it because it's one of those spells that hits a specific tile that only does 40 damage. On the positive, it hits a specific tile and it does 40 damage. You see where the problem is. But I also think that with Thunder being the way that it is, or Mini Thunder being the way that it is, I'm still going to put it at the A rank because it hits a specific tile and does 40 damage, sure, but it does so for 0 mana. It's basically just a free little shock. You know, agnostically, or I guess I should say in a vacuum, this is one of those spells that there's no harm in taking. It costs nothing, so no matter what your build is, even if you're going for the absolute 0 achievement, you can still use this, and it still gets work done. It only hits a specific tile, and to me, that's the only reason I'm not putting it in S grade. Oh, what is this? Pyroblast. Pyroblast. This is a spell that I've gotten lots of work done with in the past. Now, I'm putting it up at A rank. The only reason why I'm not putting it up at S grade is the same reason why Cryo Kinesis doesn't go up there, because it does take a little bit to actually fire out. That having been said, the target that it hits gets hit for 50. The ensuing explosion does 100, and that does it in a 3x3 box around whatever you hit. So this is a great AoE, assuming that you don't completely miss your mark. It's good for controlling Hazel's turrets. It does good damage to the gate. It's just a good spell. It's just that little wind-up time before you throw it that makes it iffy. Rage. Now, this one I'm going to put at about the B rank. Now, again, if we're talking strictly about how it works in a fire-based build, I'd still only put it up at A because it hits awkwardly. It says it hits in a cross, but it hits in a cross pattern one fireball at a time. So it doesn't hit all at once, but it does do damage for every flaming tile you have on the field. So this is one of those ones that's tricky to rate in a vacuum because it really needs the fire synergy. Without the fire synergy, it's just 30 damage in a cross pattern, which, again, can hit more than once and is good against opponents that either A, move around a lot, or B, when you need AoE damage. So it's okay by itself. I mean, I'd almost kind of want to drop it down to C rank, but I'm sticking to my guns and leaving it there. Ring of Fire. Oh boy, Ring of Fire. Essentially, if you're going to take Firewall, you should probably also take Ring of Fire. This creates 8 flames in a circle, and the initial burst does more damage than Firewall's 40. I think it does like 60 or 80. And then, of course, just leaves 8 flames around that 4-tile spot where you aim it. It's really, really good against big enemies. It's good area of effect damage. It lays flaming traps. It's just a good spell. My only issue with it is that it costs 3 mana, and the only reason why it costs 3 is because the base damage of the spell is higher than that of Firewall. But considering that you're using it to light enemy tiles on fire and create danger spots for your opponents, I'm not sure the base damage is necessary. They could make the base damage 10 and move the mana cost down to 2, and then I would say it's an S-rank spell. As is, I'm leaving it there. It's still a very good spell, still worth taking outside of fire builds. You just have to be a little bit careful of managing the 3 mana instead of the 2. Salamander. Again, poor Salamander. Because of the rules of the tier list, I have to put you down here. Because... Okay, nice. Wasn't expecting that while I was making a video. This absolutely does not work outside of fire builds. Like, you need at least like a beacon or an ember to get Salamander to do anything. Now, inside of a fire build, however, I would still only put it at a C because it's one of those things that not only do you need to be mindful of the position of your flames, but also the position of the enemy to hit with it. It does spread flames, however, and if you have tons and tons of fire on the field, like let's say that you just dropped a firewall and then Salamander popped up, that's good. That's worth using. Or say you get Firestorm and then Salamander pops up. That's good damage because each shot that it fires does good damage. It's just the realistic fact of the matter is, more often than not, you're going to have set up a wall of fire and then it's going to have gone away before you get to Salamander. So in thinner deck strats, it might work a little bit better, but my personal opinion is that inside of a fire build, it belongs at maybe low B, high C. Outside of a fire build, which is where I'm rating it, it belongs there. Thunder. 1 mana for 100 damage. It's hard to say no to that. The only issue is that it hits a specific tile, and even then, I could say that the mana cost and the damage output is well worth putting it up at the S grade. It's a cheap, quick spell. It can hit behind targets, so you can save hostages that are being held up by something behind them. It's just a good spell. It's very, very basic, but in its simplicity, it excels. Thunderstorm. I like this spell, but we do need to talk a little bit about how Thunder works in this game. All right, let me put this back down here for a minute while I talk. No, you go... Yes, there. Now, Thunder is one of those things that I think they put in Anima because it didn't have any other place to go. Thunder doesn't have its own status effect, it doesn't have shock, it doesn't have paralysis, it doesn't do anything weird and electric-y. I know I just made that word up. It's just damage. And in that respect, I'd say more often than not, fire does its job better. But these are spells that can still get the job done. I would say Thunderstorm, I'm going to put it up here at the A rank, honestly. Its area of effect, it rains Thunderbolts down on your enemy side of the field. It does less damage than Thunder, which I think is a shame because it only does, 60 damage per bolt? But it rains down 4 waves of bolts. It rains them randomly, so take it with a grain of salt. Sorry. But ultimately, I think that Thunderstorm still belongs at that A rank. Actually, you know what? No, I am going to move it down to B rank. I talked myself out of it. It's the idea that it only does, 40 to 60 damage per Thunderbolt that hits, and it still costs 4 mana to cast. Now, considering the wide area of effect, I understand the 4 mana, but could we maybe get the damage boosted up to like 70? Again, it's one of those things that it's not necessarily a terrible spell by itself, but if you're going to go for one of those big area of effect spells, you're probably better off going with Hailstorm or Firestorm. Twinferno! Oh boy, Twinferno. It only costs 2 mana. It does 70 damage when it hits, and it hits in 3x3 squares like 3 times. And if you do it right, you can actually overlap some of those squares to hit a specific enemy for 140 damage. It's a beautiful area of effect spell, and for 2 mana, getting 70 damage in an AoE is real nice. Gotta be careful of hostages, but it's real nice. And finally we end the Anima tier list with Wildfire. I'm putting it at B. Reason being is because for the mana cost, I really wish it hit more consistently in certain spots. Namely, what I've noticed is that anytime I use that spell, it'll hit 3 rows depending on where I'm standing, usually right where I'm standing, 1 above and 1 below. It fires 5 shots, and against the gate it's almost indispensable, especially since it does leave burning tiles. But it's the idea that it's really random against anything else that makes it a little bit more questionable. Now, outside of a fire build, I leave it at B. Inside of a fire build, it's better. But, I mean, take it with a grain of salt. The spell will get you some mileage, but it is also a little random, which means it's a little bit inconsistent. And a little bit inconsistent in my book means it gets pushed down a couple of ranks. So, that's my list. That's what I feel about every Anima spell. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Feel free to debate. Let me know what you guys think about this. And I will be back with more stuff in the near future. So, thank you very much for watching. Hit the like, hit the subscribe, and I will be back. Oh, I just pulled up. Oh, well, fuck it. My name is Dark Sage Walker, and I will be seeing you. Bye-bye, OBS. Whee!